G'day everyone and welcome to another Blender Guru tutorial. In this video I'm going to show you guys how to create a flamethrower using Blender. So this is the finished scene that you can see right here. So you can see we do get into a number of different elements. We're going to be starting by creating a particle system which is going to be used to propel the fuel into the air, and then we're going to be using a smoke simulator to turn those particles into smoke. So we're going to be getting into that. And then, of course, getting into the materials, so turning the smoke into a fire for the final render. Lighting as well, making it so that it affects the other objects in your scene. And then to top it all off, we'll be doing a little bit of compositing as well. So I'm sure there's going to be plenty of things in here for you to learn from, and hopefully we can have a little bit of fun along the way. Now, although a lot of you are probably thrilled about this topic choice, my audience is international, so I do just want to say right now, I don't know where you're from, but I do just want to state I do not glorify or sort of condone the use of weapons that kill or maim people. It's just a study of fire and physics. This sort of tutorial could be used for many different uses. For example, a dragon breathing fire, or the turbines from a jet engine, or like a plane crashing into the ground. I mean, there's a number of different uses. I've chosen a flamethrower just because it's a very easily recreatable result. Doesn't take too much time to achieve, and yeah, it's a nice study of how the smoke simulator works as well. So that's why we're doing it on this topic. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into the tutorial. Now, despite what you might think, flamethrowers do not propel or blow flame. They basically throw fuel into the air, and then that fuel is ignited, usually with a fuse or something like that, which gives the appearance of a flame that is flying through the air. So it's important to note that as you're creating this in Blender, you don't try to, create a really large like a candle flame kind of thing. It's completely different to that. It's the equivalent of if you were to fill a fire truck with fuel and then, spray fuel everywhere, and then you held a match to the end of the nozzle. It would have the exact same effect. So that's what, that's what a flamethrower is. So now with that out of the way, we can go ahead and get into Blender. So go ahead and open up a new scene now. So the first thing we're going to do is create the particle emitter, which is going to be throwing the fuel into the scene. So let's go ahead and replace this cube with a plane. Now I'm going to rotate this by 90 degrees because the particles are going to be thrown from basically whichever way the normals are facing, which would be now to the left, which is what we want. And I'm going to place it about there. So now if we jump over to the particle settings, so go there, add a new particle system, and I'm just going to call this one flames, for example. And if you hit Alt-A, you can see the particles are now being produced. Now we want to make it so that it's actually thrown across the scene. So currently this looks more like a dribbling tap than a flamethrower. So the setting for that is the normal amount right there. So I used a setting of 8, which makes it fly out a lot faster than as default. And we're also going to scale down the size of that plane as well, because we want to make it look like it's, coming from a flamethrower, which is, a small nozzle. So scaling it down achieves that effect. And you can also turn up the normal amount. So I think for mine, I set mine to about a 0.2, and that just makes it just a little bit more random. So you can turn that up to, whatever you want. If you want to make it look like a spraying tap, you can. But yeah, I used a setting of 0.2, which should give that nice effect there. And what else? For rendering, by default, it sets the rendering to halo. Let's set that to none because we don't want to make these, white puffy halos appear in our scene. But underneath display, you need to set it back to point so that you can actually see the particles again. So that's one thing to note. And you can also go down into the field weights and set the gravity to something like 0.7 or something, because, it's fuel that's being thrown from an object, and you know how liquid is when it's thrown through the air. It doesn't fall like a rock. Depending on the size of the droplets, it may float through the air. It might, whatever. So, setting it to that is a little bit more realistic. But yeah, everything else. The other thing is the particle amount. That's a really big one because each one of these little particle points there is going to be smoke. Or it's going to be, when we add the smoke simulator, each one of those little points is going to be smoke. So the number of this really does have an influence on how the smoke or fire will appear in your scene. So I set mine to 8,000, which gives you significantly more particles. But it's really important to turn that up to something appropriate, because if you render the smoke and you notice that there's little dots appearing, like... sort of hard to describe, but you'll know what I mean when you see it. That could be because you don't have enough particles there. So that's just one thing to note. Okay, so with that set up, we can now create a plane to have the particles ricochet off, because currently it's just, going forever. So let's add a plane right here. Oh, sorry. Add a plane to about there. And I might position this somewhere like that. And to make it so that this plane here interacts with our flamethrower, we need to go to the physics panel and turn on collision. And now you can see that the particles are now bouncing off it. So you need to turn the particle dampening down all the way to 1. And also maybe give it a little bit of a randomization as well, so that some of them bounce a little bit, so it looks kind of like splattering of fuel on a plane like that. And to make it so it's not sliding off the surface like that, turn up the friction to something appropriate. Something like that should be okay. And maybe turn up the random amount as well, so some of it kind of flies a little bit beyond it. But yeah, that's I'd say that's looking pretty good so far. Okay, so now we've set that up. If we want to, actually, we can create another one just over here, just on the other side, just so that the particles don't bounce off that edge there. I mean, you can place this plane wherever you want. You can create an interesting scene if you want. I'm just, placing mine at the end there. And now, actually, because I'm sure some of you might want to recreate the effect that I did at the beginning, if you want to make it so that it's kind of throwing flame in like multiple directions, you can create a keyframe just by positioning it, say, there with the plane selected. If you hit I and then rotation, and then move, say, 10 keyframes in advance, rotate it up, hit I, rotation, and then let's say rotate it down a little bit, and then we're going to rotate it the other way, and then down, and then let's go again over here, and let's rotate in this direction. So let's see how that looks. I'm not sure if I've done that right. Not sure what was going on there. Let's try that again. Yeah, so that's basically how you, change the angle at which it's propelling from, so you can experiment with that all you like, or you can even move the flamethrower. It's entirely up to you. Okay, but that's the basis of that done. So now we can get into the smoke simulator. Finally, I'm sure a lot of you have been waiting for this, so let's do that. Now the way the smoke simulator works is you need to create an object in which the smoke is to be simulated inside of. So that object is a cube. Nothing else really works. It's all defined by a cube. So add a cube like this, and basically, you just want it to fit the scene. You don't want it to be larger than the scene, because basically the bigger you make this cube, the longer it's going to take to bake the simulation. So you want it to be as small as possible, whilst also keeping in mind that if it's too small, then the smoke is going to be rebounding off the edges, and if you can see that in the render, then obviously it's going to look very fake. So something like that should be fine. And I'm just going to position the camera just front on, just here, so I can see how it looks. Something like this. Might just move this plane over just a little bit more. Give that a bit of room, and then move that up. Now, the other important thing to note is to not go into edit mode and then try to move the plane around like that and to try and make it fit. It's important to always resize the cube in object mode by scaling and then pressing Y, S, Y, or S, Z. You have to do it like that. Otherwise, when you go to render it, you may find a problem where you've got like repeating smoke everywhere, and it looks very, very weird, very strange, and you'll be wondering why it's happening. Now you know. So make sure you edit just in object mode, not going into edit mode. Okay, I might have to move that out a little bit. Move it to the left. like so. All right, let's try it again. Okay, cool. All right. So, to turn those particles into smoke, with the domain object here selected, we're going to go ahead into the physics panel, check smoke, and then change it from none to domain. Now, you can really only have one domain object in the scene, and basically the domain object will define how your smoke is going to look. There's a few other little settings you can do for separate objects within the scene, for this one or whatever, but the majority of how the smoke is going to look is defined by these settings right here. Now, it's pretty basic to understand this. There's not really all that much, at least in this instance, there's not really all that much to learn. Basically, resolution will define how high resolution your smoke will look. Pretty self-explanatory. Again, the higher you make those divisions amounts there, the better the smoke is going to look. But of course, you're going to pay for that in your baking times. So for my final one, I used 160, which is really, really high res, but it took about 6 hours to bake. Bake, by the way, is the term used for running a simulation. It took about 6 hours to bake it for 300 frames. So for the sake of this tutorial and for your patience and mine, I'm going to set this to 50 just so we can see how it looks. And just for this tutorial. And then at the end, I might change it, whatever. The other thing is the smoke high resolution amount. What this will do is it will take this resolution here. If you kind of imagine this resolution is kind of giving the base mesh of the smoke, this one here will apply some kind of ruffling up of the outside of the smoke to make it look more realistic. And it's really, really important to use this because otherwise the smoke is going to look very, very soft, very plain, and very boring. So I used a resolution amount of 2. I think I rarely go above 2. I think maybe once I used 3, but around 1 or 2 is enough. But again, that really does turn up the render time, so be aware of that. The other thing you might want to do is change it from wavelet to FFT. I've just found personally it gives kind of a little bit better looking high resolution smoke. You may not have that depending on your build and your operating system. I don't know why, but with my last fire tutorial, some people were saying they didn't have the FFT option. If you don't have it, don't worry, just use wavelet. It's perfectly fine. It will almost look identical anyway. It's not that big of a deal. The other one to note is the dissolve amount. What that will do is it will basically, if you just leave dissolve off, it means the smoke will remain in the scene until it reaches an end and comes out the top or whatever. But dissolve will ensure that the smoke slowly dissolves over time and then just eventually vanishes. So it's more realistic looking smoke. So we're going to set that to dissolve. Uncheck slow. I haven't really kind of figured out what slow does. It says using 1 speed. You can use slow if you want. It doesn't really matter. I'm just going to set this to 350, which I'm assuming means over 350 frames it's going to fade out. I'm guessing. But yeah, experiment with those settings if you like. It's not that big of a deal. Okay. Now you've set that up, before you can actually see the smoke being created, you need to select your particle system and make that a smoke object as well, and then check flow, okay? I'm going to turn off my speakers because it's making these little beeping noises. So check flow, and by default, it's already selected the particle system you've already made there, so select that. And the only thing you need to do here is to check initial velocity. And what that will do is it will take this value right here, normal 8 value, and it will force the smoke out in that direction. So basically it gives the smoke a starting speed of that. Now that is a little bit too high. 8 is a lot, but I need it set to 8 because I want the particles to be thrown in that direction. So going back here, you can change the multiplier. I'm going to change it to 0.3. So basically it's 30% of 8, whatever that is. So it's a little less forceful and it just looks a little bit nicer. But again, you might want to experiment with that depending on your scene. Anyway, if you go ahead and hit Alt-A right now, you can see that those particles are now being turned into smoke, which is exactly what we want. And it does get a little bit crazy in this little domain cube here. Looks like a roaring forest fire as opposed to a flamethrower, but whatever. It's if you want more high resolution smoke, of course, you can go there and change that to whatever you want. We're going to leave it as 50 for now. If you were to render this right now, you're not going to see anything at all. The reason for that is you need to give it a material, and that's what we're going to do now. So for the smoke, we're going to add a new material. Let's just call this, let's call it fire. And we're going to change it from surface rendering to volumetric rendering. Volumetric, by the way, is kind of cloud-like rendering, so it lets light pass through it, etc. We're going to turn the density of that all the way down to 0, which means you won't be able to see it now in this little preview window, but that's okay because the density amount is going to be defined in the textures in just a moment. So set that to 0, and we're going to set the scattering amount to 0.5 and the emission amount to 6. Some of these settings I borrowed off Mika's fire tutorial. I saw his tutorial there and he had some really nice looking results, so I'm just copying a few of those settings there that I found worked quite nicely. The other one is down here in the integration panel. The step size defines how noisy the smoke is going to look. So the higher you set that to, the more noisy the smoke is going to look, but the faster it's going to render. So for a preview render, 0.2 works really good because it'll render the smoke quite quickly. But if you were doing a final render, I usually set this to like a 0.05 or a 0.04 or 3 or something like that. And it will take a lot longer to render, but it will give more clearer, less noisy looking smoke. But yeah, it's a preview render, so we're just going to leave that at 0.2 for now. Now we need to jump over to the texture panel. Going to add a new texture, and we're going to change the texture type to voxel data. Voxel data basically means it's now going to use the voxel data, which is this smoke simulation right here, to render. So now we've selected that. If you go down here to domain object, it's looking for the name of a domain object. The domain object is this right here. The name of it, bottom left-hand corner, is cube. So just go ahead and select cube. And you can see there in the little preview window, it's giving you a preview of what the smoke looks like, which is very good. And now we're going to change the influence from emission to density. Okay, and yeah, if we went ahead and rendered this right now, we should now see what looks like some very white looking smoke. And there you go. So that is smoke. Now, one thing to note is that you've got a bit of weird shadow problems. The lamp is inside that cube at the moment, but if I put that outside and render, I'll show you what I mean. Yeah, the area where there's that domain cube, there's no shadow being cast. The reason for that is that it's treating this cube right here as if it's one solid cube, and it's casting a shadow across the scene as if it's one solid cube, not taking into relation any of the smoke inside of it. The reason for that is with actually these planes here. You need to go to the material settings, give it a material, down here underneath shadow, and check receive transparent. That basically means it will now receive shadows from objects which have some form of transparency. So this is true if you use objects with a PNG image texture with an alpha map or something like that. If you're getting thick black shadows showing up, it's probably because you haven't turned on receive transparent. I get asked that question a lot, so that's why I'm telling you here. And I'm also going to turn the specularity off, and I'm just going to give this one the exact same material by hitting Control L like that. Okay, so now if we render that, you should see that there is a nice even lighting over everything. And you can even see that the smoke is now casting a shadow on the ground there as well. So everything's looking all fine and dandy. The reason the smoke is appearing very, very white at the moment is for two reasons. One is that the the particle, if I can actually grab it, I can't even see it. Where are you? Let me see. Aha, there we go. Okay, the smoke, by default, when you add a particle system, it renders it as a halo object. Okay, we already unchecked that. All right, never mind about that then. Yeah, the other reason it's showing up is as a solid white object is that in the materials for this smoke, we set the emission to 1. If we set that to the default of, we set it to 6. If we set it to the default of 1, it shows up a lot nicer. But because we want this to look like a roaring fire, we're setting it at 6 for now. So leave that at 6. All right, okay, let's move on to turning this smoke now into fire. Go back to the texture settings here, and I'm going to call this density, just so we can remember it. We're going to add a new texture here, again changing it to voxel data. Again, domain object is called cube. And then down here, we're going to change the blend from mix to multiply. basically what that's going to do is it's going to take this texture here and apply it over the top of this density texture in the background. So that's what we're doing. Now, this texture here is going to be basically purely color. So we're basically coloring the smoke now. So to do that, we're going to check density. No, just going to leave it as emission color. And we're going to go to the color settings and we're going to check ramp. If you've never used the color ramp before, basically it's pretty simple. All we're going to do is we're going to be painting it in the right hand side is going to be solid white, and then as it goes from right to left, it's going to go from white, yellow to orange to red, and then finally to nothing. So we're going to try and give it that appearance right now. Just by hitting the add button there, we can add a new anchor point. Going to turn the alpha up, and let's make this a nice bright yellow like that. Let's add another point here. This one is going to be an orange like that, and add another point, and this is going to be an fire red color like that. And I'm also going to pull back that alpha there. The reason we're pulling that back a little bit is that basically some of the smoke, some of this smoke that you can see right here won't have any color applied to it, which means if there's any lighting, it will appear just as smoke, not as fire. So that's very important because you want to have fire and smoke appearance. So yeah, just leave a little bit there to the left of it where there's no alpha at all, so it won't have any color, and yeah, it'll have the appearance of smoke instead. So you can rearrange this, and it does really depend on how thick the smoke is in your scene, etc. Because this bases it entirely off the density of the smoke in the background. So in these really thick parts of smoke, it's going to show up as solid white. And then in these lesser parts over in the corners, it's going to show up as maybe an orange or a red, depending on, you know, how dense the smoke is. Okay, but now we've set that up. If we go ahead and hit render now, fingers crossed, it should render that like that. And there you go. So you've now created fire. How does it feel? So it doesn't look very good, I'll admit, but it's fire at least. So I'm gonna make the background a solid black now, and I'm gonna turn. I'm gonna put the lamp. I'm gonna put it directly above it, like I did for my scene. I'm gonna make it a spot lamp, and I'm gonna make it really, really weak and slightly blue. Like that. Set that there. Distance, turn it down. And no specularity. So let's try that now. And we should just see that. Okay, cool. I might also just turn up that. Oh, what did I check? Square. No. I want it to be circular still. Yeah, the reason I'm using a blue lamp, by the way, is that blue is kind of opposite on the color wheel in relation to yellow and red. So, yeah, it just looks a lot nicer. They kind of go together, blue and red, so that's why I'm making it blue. Just a little tip there for you guys. Okay, cool. So, one thing you'll note is that the fire is not having any effect on the scene whatsoever. The reason for that is that this, you know, although it looks cool and you've set up emission settings and things like that, it does not cast any light on anything in your scene at all. That all needs to be done manually, at least at the time of this recording. Yeah, it all needs to be done manually. So what we're going to do is we're going to create one lamp like this, and yeah, we'll just make a lamp like that. Let's just call this fire lamp, like so. And what you can do is with these particles selected, if I can actually do it, come on, show me the particles. Show it. Okay, cool. Oh, finally got them. How hard is that? All right, so with the particles selected, if you go down here in the render settings, you can make it so that it renders each of these as an object. So what we're going to do is we're going to choose object, and I'm going to select lamp. I think, no, it's running it as that one. I don't want that one. Why isn't fire lamp there? Okay, let's try and find it. Fire lamp. Okay, well, that's not working properly. Alright then, let's instead, if that happens, let's hit Control G, and that's going to make it a group. And let's call this group fire lamp. And now with this plane, with this particles here selected, let's change it from object to group, and then we'll select fire lamp. So now, if I just set that to rendered, you can see each one of those particles is now going to render it as this lamp right here. So this is how we're going to color the scene, or this is how we're going to give the appearance as though those particles are lighting up the scene. So I'm going to make this a really, really weak amount, because remember there's 8,000 of these lamps being thrown out there. So you want to make it very, very weak and give it an orangey color like so. You might also want to turn on sphere and then set this to something reasonable like 5 or something like that. And that just defines, you know, the parts of the scene it's going to affect. And also with the particles selected there, let's turn it back to point so it looks, yeah, a little bit nicer. And now we're going to go ahead and rebake that because the smoke's disappeared for some reason. Probably because I, yeah, added a group or whatever. Sometimes does that. Alright, so now let's re-render this, and we should now see that the particles are now affecting the scene. So it should look a little bit more realistic. Cool, awesome. So you can see it's had that effect. The other cool thing is that the lamps that are making up these particles now are also lighting up the smoke as well. So it's giving, yeah, an even more realistic look to it. So, yeah, it's very, very nifty looking result so far. I'm going to just bump up this resolution amount now. Let's make it 85, and let's set the smoke cache to be... Oh, yeah, if you can't select the smoke cache, you have to save your render, your scene wherever you are. Just call it like that. Now you can actually set the smoke cache. Now the end file, that basically defines, you know, the point at which the smoke stops being calculated. I'm just going to set this to 150, and the end of my animation, I'm going to make that 150 as well. And we've set everything else up. The other thing you might want to do, I didn't actually do this for my final render, but I should have. The border collisions, it's currently set up as vertically open, which basically means that the smoke will hit the walls, you know, these walls that are around the edge there. It'll hit them and it'll bounce off them, but when it goes out the top, it would disappear, which is actually what we want. We don't want it to bounce off any of these walls at all, because, you know, if it bumps off these side walls, it's just going to look weird, like these kind of like bubbles appearing kind of thing, which is, I think you can actually see that in my one. So go ahead and change it to open. So all the walls are now completely open. With that set up though, you do need to, with this plane here selected, you need to turn on, you need to make it a smoke object as well, and then make it a collision object, okay? Let's do the same here. Collision. One thing to note though is when you have collision objects in your scene, it does increase the render times, the baking time, sorry, by a lot. When I was doing that New York post-apocalyptic earthquake scene from a year ago or whatever, I had one object which was a really high poly, and I made it a collision object for some reason, and I just couldn't figure out why it was taking forever to bake, and it was because of that one object. And the minute I deleted it or changed it to be none, it just bakes so much quicker. So that's just one thing to note. Anyway, now we've set that up, go to the domain and then just click Bake All Dynamics. And this little counter here will appear at your cursor. Those numbers, by the way, mean percentage. So once that reaches 100, it means it's finished baking. So let's go ahead and jump to once it's finished. And it's finished. Render that now, or play it now, and you can see what is going. Oh dear. Okay, well, something weird is going on. Yeah, wouldn't have the slightest idea. Why is the particles not showing up properly? All right, well, let's try that again. Hey, all right, finally. Okay, so I basically just had to, yeah, rebake that. I have no idea why it caused those problems before. Sometimes it happens, guys. That's just the reality of it. So, anyway, now we've got that running. Let's give it a quick render now and see how it looks with our materials, lighting, textures and everything else we've done to it. So it should be looking a little bit like fire now, hopefully, or else something's gone wrong. But yeah, it's pretty close to it. Ultimately, the appearance of this fire right here, like for example, this is coming up as quite red. That's defined by basically whatever you put in here. So if I push this forward a little bit, maybe make that, draw that, maybe bring that back a little bit. You can basically define what parts are going to be showing up as fire, which parts are going to be red, which parts are going to be more white. So I want this to be a little bit more yellowy, whitish color and less of that red. So I'm just going to bring that back a little bit. Actually, maybe bring that to there. Maybe pull that out a little bit. And yeah, I don't want it to be as red as it is right now. So let's try and re-render it right now. And yeah, now it has a little bit more of an orangey, yellowy type feel to it. But yeah, okay, all right. So the final thing we're going to be doing is the compositing itself. So let's jump over to the compositor right now. Load this up right here, and normally for a glow effect, which is the one we're trying to create right now, I would normally create a blur node and try and do something like that. I've recently discovered the glare node does just pretty much the same thing, and you don't have to worry about adding like an RGB curve and dropping that in between it and fiddling around with all those settings. You can just do it all from the glare node, and if you change it from streaks to fog glow, then you can essentially just have a glow right there, just in it. So the other thing that's really good by using the glow node is you can turn down the threshold very easily, and you can create more and more parts of it which are going to be glowing. So basically, if you set that up, then it means less and less parts are going to have the glow. So for example, pretty much only that white part there has the glow. If I turn that way down, then pretty much everything is going to be glowing. So that's essentially what that does. So something like that should be good. And size maybe a little bit higher, again. But yeah, something like that is pretty good. You can set the quality to a little bit higher quality if you want. And to top it all off, I'm going to also give it a vignette. So of course, always end with a vignette. Add a lens distortion node, turn the distortion up to 1. I'm now going to add a math node, drop that in there, set this to greater than, set that to 0. Now add a blur node, set this to fast Gaussian, make this 20%, and now add a mix node. So how was that? I very clearly described that one. A lot of people say I go too fast through the compositing side of things because it's kind of the end of the tutorial, so I kind of speed it up a bit, but I slowed that one down, so hopefully you guys like that. And that just cleans up those corners there. There's not really much to this scene because it's just two planes and a flamethrower effect. But we're trying to create the flamethrower effect, and as you can see, we've created one. Now, of course, you can go ahead and add some textures to these planes there, which is going to improve the look and obviously improving the division amount. So like I said, I set mine to 160, and then my high division amount to 2, and that produces a lot nicer looking effect. So that really does play a huge part in how it looks at the moment. Looks very low res at the moment, but yeah, fiddle around with those settings. If you've got time, bake it overnight and you'll get some really nice looking smoke. But yeah, that's all from me, guys. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Leave a comment, let me know what you thought of it. Give me some feedback, a little bit of love, whatever you can manage. And thanks very much for watching.